Now shall I introduce, put in all the people in? Still 4 minutes are there.
Yeah.
Shall I do it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just wait. I'll just put the security unmute and start it. Okay.
It's 2 minutes. One minute. Those who are not going to be speaking can please mute their microphones. Mr. Maini, you will have to tell me when it's time to start. Mr. Maini, you're on mute.
Yeah, please start.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sayona Philip, Chair of the Ethics and Quality Committee of Consulting Engineers Association of India, or the CEAI. The CEAI is the Indian Member Association of FIDIC in India and works for the interest of consulting organizations and eminent engineering consultants. This webinar on business ethics and corporate governance is being organized with the objective to advocate ethical practices amongst the consulting fraternity. With that, I would like to invite Mr. JVL Narayana, Vice President CEAI, to give his opening remarks. A few words about Mr. Narayana. Mr. Narayana is a civil engineer and transport planner by education and has about 30 years of professional engineering experience in consulting engineering in the areas of transportation, water, buildings, environmental, and urban planning. He has held senior level management positions in leading international consulting engineering firms like Royal Asconic DHV, Netherlands, WSP, Halcro, etc., prior to his current employment. Currently, he is Regional Director North with Ms. RV Associates, Architects, Engineers, and Consultants. Mr. Narayana, over to you.
Thank you, Madam. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm extremely happy to be part of this webinar organized by CEAI Ethics and Quality Committee. As you all may be aware, CEAI is an apex body of consulting engineers in India, having membership of organizations as well as individuals. Incorporated in 1996 with the merger of two leading national associations, Association of Consulting Engineers India, which was established in 1960, and National Association of Consulting Engineers, incorporated in 1976. Thus, CEI has 6 decades of accumulated knowledge and experience behind it and works with key objectives of advocating global networking and cooperation, quality development and production enhancement of consultants, promotion of ethical practices of consultants, and facilitation and interaction with government and other authorities and bodies to streamline and improve the systems of engagement of consultants. With over 500 members of CEI and representing the large, medium, and small consultancy companies and organizations, both in public and private sector, and we have eminent individuals as well as the consultants associated with the CEI. CEI is also a member association of International Federation of Consulting Engineers, commonly known as FEDIC, representing the consulting fraternity in India. The Ethics and Quality Committee has a team of seasoned professionals who work on advocating ethical principles and practices through various forms and creating a quality culture amongst the consulting engineering fraternity. The enthusiasm shown by the CEI's Ethics and Quality Committee in organizing webinars is highly appreciated. I'm also excited to see a large number of participation in today's webinar. I'm confident that today's webinar on business ethics and corporate governance will provide insights to you all on the said subject. Best wishes to you all, one and all, for joining us today. I take the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Sayona Philip, the chairperson of Ethics and Quality Committee, and request Mrs. Sayona Philip to moderate today's seminar. And just to give you a backdrop of Madam, she is a civil engineer from IIT Madras and master's from Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok. She has been with Tata Consulting Engineers for 30 years and has held senior management positions. She headed business operations in Delhi and business head for emerging market segments in TCE. She has led several MBD funded projects, and she is also an ethics counselor for over 10 years now. She is currently working as an advisor at TCE and also a former president of CEI. Thank you very much, Madam. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Narayana, for the introduction, of course, and also for giving us a brief about what CEI is all about. I am now pleased to introduce Mr. Umesh Srivastava, currently chairman of the Ethics Subcommittee. A little bit about Mr. Srivastava. He's one of the veterans in our association. Mr. Umesh Srivastava is executive chairman and founder of Holtec Consulting, which renders consulting services to cement, construction, and infrastructure sectors. The company has been actively associated with the cement industry since 1967 and has carried out assignments in over 70 countries. Mr. Srivastava obtained his engineering degree from Banaras Hindu University and did the advanced management program at Harvard Business School. He acquired training and work experience for over 4 years in West Germany, Canada, US, and Switzerland. He has been the president of the National Association of Consulting Engineers and has served on the governing council of CEI for decades. The Lifetime Achievement Award has been conferred on him by CEI, IIT BHU as an alumni, and Indian Cement Review. Mr. Srivastava, please, the floor is yours.
Unmute. You have to unmute.
Many thanks, Sayona. It's a pleasure to be here today. The webinar theme that we have today incorporates two very important concepts, namely business ethics, and corporate governance, applicable to both business as well as other businesses, as well as engineering consultancy. To start with business ethics, which refers to the principles and standards that guide the behavior in the world of business. It involves applying ethical principles and values to the business behavior, ensuring that the companies operate in a manner that is fair, that is transparent, and beneficial to all stakeholders, including the employees, customers, suppliers, and the community at large. Basic tenets of business ethics include integrity, honesty, fairness, transparency, accountability, respect for individuals, environmental responsibility, law compliance, social responsibility, etc. Application of business ethics to engineering consultancy business leads to accuracy, precision, public safety, professional competence, confidentiality, avoiding conflict of interest, and many more. Further gains are enhanced reputation, customer loyalty, employee morale, reduction in sustainable growth. Adherence to business ethics can achieve a balance between economic performance and social and environmental responsibilities. And now a little bit of corporate governance, which refers to the system by which the companies are directed and controlled. It involves a set of relationships between the company's management, its board, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. Corporate governance provides the structure through which the objectives of the company are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring the performance are determined. Basic tenets of corporate governance include accountability, transparency, fairness and responsibility, and possible gains are better risk management, operational efficiency, investor confidence, and client satisfaction. If corporate governance is neglected, it can lead to poor decision-making, reputation damage, financial losses, and legal issues. Corporate governance is essential for engineering consultancy business to ensure accountability, transparency, and ethical practices. There is a need for a congruence between these two elements that we have just talked. Congruence and alignment between business ethics and corporate governance. If congruence and alignment are carried out, the expected gains could be enhancement in the reputation of the company, investor confidence, employee morale and retention, customer loyalty, and sustainable growth. If not aligned, the consequences could be reputation damage, legal issues, financial losses, employee turnover, investor withdrawal, and customer attrition. For an engineering consultancy company, the alignment is crucial due to the nature of the work that we do, which often involves safety, regulatory, and environmental considerations. The alignment of business ethics and corporate governance is fundamental to the success and sustainability of any company, particularly for cement consultancies and other areas also. The stakes can be in terms of safety, compliance, and reputation, which are indeed high. I have attempted to paint the canvas with a very, very broad brush. The three learned, eminent speakers could deal with the intricacies of the theme of the webinar. With that, I'll pass on the baton again to Sayona. Here you are, Sayona.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Srivastava, for explaining very clearly and briefly the theme of today's webinar. We will now invite our eminent speakers to throw light on various aspects of business ethics and corporate governance from their perspective. We look forward to active participation by the attendees in the interaction that follows thereafter. It is my privilege to introduce Professor Rohit Varman, Birmingham Business School, University of Birmingham, a top university in the UK, whose theme would be Corporate Social Responsibility and Ethical Challenges for Businesses. A few words about Professor Varman. Professor Varman is Professor of Marketing and Consumption at BBS. His current interdisciplinary research focuses on corporate violence, exploitation, unfree labor, and resistance to corporatization and marketization. He has published in leading journals, including Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Retailing, Organization Science, Human Relations, Organization Studies, Journal of Service Research, and Marketing Theory. His research was awarded the Emerald Citation of Excellence in 2015. He is former president of the International Society of Markets and Development. He is currently a co-editor-in-chief of Marketing Theory and an associate editor of Consumption, Markets and Culture. He is also on the editorial boards of Journal of Macro Marketing, Journal of Marketing Management, and Journal of Historical Research in Marketing. Professor Varman, we look forward to hearing from you. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Ms. Phillip, for that introduction. What I'm going to do is switch to my screen, and I hope all of you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. I'm so grateful to CEI for inviting me. I'm grateful to Mr. Srivastava for initiating it. It's a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to do is to briefly talk about the issue of corporate social responsibility, because it is at the heart of the question of business ethics. When I was listening to Mr. Srivastava and the checklist that he was reading out, the ideas of fairness, the ideas of transparency, sustainability, and so on and so forth, you will realize that these are some of the key questions that are, that are being targeted through the idea of CSR. Now, what is it that we mean by CSR? The idea of corporate responsibility, as World Business Council in 2005 framed it, is the commitment of business to contribute to sustainable economic development, working with employees, their families, the local community, and society at large to improve their quality of life. Now, while this is a fantastic claim, what I'll try to illustrate in my brief presentation is that how there is often a gap between some of these claims and what is being actually done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a couple of case studies to illustrate my point. Okay. Now, let me start with the case of a very eminent, very well-known corporation called Coca-Cola. Now, here is Coca-Cola's CSR statement. And let me just read it out for you. Now, what is Coca-Cola claiming? It claims that here at Coca-Cola, we make every effort to be a front runner in corporate citizenship and sustainable development, making considerations for our customers and employees, striving to enhance the eminence of life for the societies and neighborhoods where we operate, and serve as good stewards of the public, and the environment. And this is a fantastic claim to make. But is this actually true? Or is there a gap between what a corporation like Coca-Cola promises and what it is actually delivering to local communities? And if I can just take you to a site which we all are very familiar with, this is a site near Varanasi. It's called the village of Mehendiganj. Now, in Mehendiganj, in 1999, Coca-Cola started a bottling plant. Now, this bottling plant for the initial years, there was a fair bit of support, there was a fair bit of enthusiasm amongst the local villagers, because they thought here was an opportunity to get employment, here was a corporation which would possibly lead this particular region to the path of development. But from 2002 onwards, what we see here is consistent and sustained protest against the activities of Coca-Cola. Now, what are some of the problems that the villagers are encountering, and what are their reasons for protest? According to villagers living in and around Mehendiganj, Coca-Cola has been siphoning off around 2.5 million liters of water every day. Now, if you understand broadly this region, this is a region which is primarily dependent on agriculture. It's a village which is inhabited primarily by Patels as a caste, and who are dependent on, apart from weaving, who are dependent on agriculture. And what they claim is that when a corporation like Coca-Cola starts withdrawing water at that scale, it harms their agricultural interests. What they've been claiming is that the water table has been receding, water has become increasingly inaccessible, and there is a risk of their aquifers collapsing. Okay, so what you will see is that organizations have stepped in. There have been several organizations which have been leading protest activities there. And what you also see is the state intervening. State periodically has intervened according to the protesters on the behalf of Coca-Cola, and pushed against the protest activities. Now, you will see here is a paradox. Here is a company that claims to spread happiness. That's its key theme of advertising. That is what it claims in its statement of corporate responsibility. But the reality is somewhat different. As I mentioned earlier, it uses the state, according to protesters, to push against any protest, any resistance that they wish to offer. And what you see is a form of violence against the local community. So instead of what is promised through their CSR statement, what we see is violence being inflicted on the community. Now, violence can be of different forms. One is of a physical form that you see in this image, where the state can intervene on your behalf and actually inflict physical violence. But that's not the most dangerous form of violence, I'll argue. Borrowing from Zizek, I'll argue the most dangerous form of violence is structural violence, which goes on in the everyday functioning of our markets and our economic activities, through which people are disenfranchised, their economic sources are destabilized, and they are pushed into further abyss of poverty and malnutrition and so on and so forth. That's the most dangerous form of violence, which is structural in nature. But this form of violence obviously not only doesn't show in some of these statements of corporate governance, corporate accountability, and reports that are published. They rarely find any mention in media reports. They rarely show in the accounts created by the state. But these are your everyday realities that people have to deal with. Now, this is a site where I've done research. So I've spoken to protesters, I've spoken to Coca-Cola officials, and I've spent some time trying to understand what exactly has been going on. I've written about it. And when I spoke to Coca-Cola managers, what they did was, they presented themselves as socially responsible. They gave me examples of how Coca-Cola in this bottling plant has hired or had hired 15 deaf and dumb workers. You know, this is, I'm quoting exactly how it was put across to me. Their point was that by giving opportunities to disabled individuals, they were being responsible. They also pointed to a rainwater harvesting initiative that they had created to offset the water that they had been siphoning off. Okay, so what you will see is that Coca-Cola presents itself as socially responsible, which is completely contrarian to the claims that are made by protesters and villagers. It also claims to be a law-abiding organization that follows government rules. So if you ask Coca-Cola managers, they'll tell you that, listen, we are following the rules. Now, if there's a problem with the withdrawal of water, then it is for the state to intervene. But I think that's highly simplistic. They also claim that they are a convenient target for self-serving activists, that activists are trying to make gains by targeting this huge megacorp called Coca-Cola. They also further went on to observe that Coca-Cola is a force of development in this underdeveloped region. They labeled the site as a site of backwardness, people as lazy, and a site where criminal activities are high, and by creating economic opportunities, they were going to curb those aspects. Now you can see there is clearly a mismatch between what this corporation is claiming and what villagers see as their reality. And these are some of the issues that we have to ponder over when we talk about business ethics and when we talk about corporate social responsibility. I.e., what I'm trying to say is, what is the gap between the claims that are made by corporations and the actual reality? And for me, that reality has to be often tested by going to the most subordinate, by going to the most disempowered in that particular site. I'll give you another example here. And this is the example which moves to a completely different sector, which is of H&M. H&M, as you will understand, is a fast fashion retailer, a large global brand again. And they, again, if you go to their site and if you listen to their managers, they make very serious claims about corporate responsibility. They claim that they are responsible. They claim that they are conscious of the rights of their workers. Their practices are sustainable, and so on and so forth. If you look at the list which is provided here, it conforms very closely to the initial checklist that Mr. Srivastava talked about. Okay, but is this actually the case, or there's more to it? And again, what you will see is actually there's more to it. Now, if you see some of the reports that have come out on the whole problem of modern slavery as it exists, which is a problem of unfree labor, and I'll quickly define it, but all I want you to do is to pay attention to what the figures here are. And if you look at some of the reports that have been published on the problem of modern slavery, it states that nearly 127 billion worth of garments are at risk of including modern slavery in their supply chain, and which are imported annually by G20 countries, a group of nations which account for 80% of world trade. These imports help underwrite a global economy that trapped nearly 40 million people in modern slavery in 2016. And again, what is to be noted is that 71% of these are actually women, the most disenfranchised in our societies. Now, what is it that we mean by modern slavery? Modern slavery, according to Bales and his colleagues, is a relationship in which one person is controlled by another through violence, the threat of violence, or psychological coercion, has lost free will and free movement, is exploited economically, and is paid nothing beyond subsistence. Okay. Now, think about it. Modern slavery was associated with transatlantic slave trade, right? But what is being argued is that we see a much bigger scale of slavery today than was the case with transatlantic slavery. You know, according to some of the recent figures that ILO has published, and again, Walk Free Foundation has come out with, we have nearly 50 million slaves. And somebody who looks at this question, who looks at this problem, I can tell you, this is always going to be an underestimation because so much of it happens below the radar. If you further see our own position, in India, we have the highest number of slaves. I mean, that's partly because of the size of the population, but partly it's a reflection of the inequity that exists. According to these figures, nearly 11 million slaves exist in India alone. And you will see all forms of slavery. You will see chattel slavery has historically existed, where humans have been thingified and they can be bought and sold like commodities. You also see debt bondage slavery, where somebody has taken debt and then is forced to work as a slave. You have contract slavery, where somebody has been forced to sign a contract. Okay, and you will see several supply chains, especially when it comes to fast fashion. The supply chains are highly tainted with this form of labor. Now, what are some of the features of modern slavery? Modern slavery may not be long-term. Again, this is a point of departure from how we understood transatlantic slavery, right? Which was for your whole life. And this, in the case of contemporary modern slavery, it can be short. It can be for brief periods of time. Your racial differences are less important. These are not Africans being, forced to move from one part of the world to another part. It is also argued by scholars who look at the question that, your purchasing costs are much lower today, because what you allow to happen is you allow the market forces to dominate here. And when you allow market forces to dominate, what you're creating here are market slaves. So you don't have to physically force somebody to move from one part to another part, or to be confined to this relationship of unfreedom. What you can do is you can make the market conditions in such a manner that a person is forced to offer his or her labor under these conditions of unfreedom, which is what we see here. Slaves are also disposable, unlike, again, transatlantic slavery, where it was a matter of a loss of honor for a slave owner to lose a slave. Now, this is eminently disposable. These are dispensable lives. You can buy, sell, or you can hire people temporarily and then dispose them off. Unlike, again, in transatlantic slavery, where individuals were natally alienated. Natally alienated means that they were completely stripped of their social ties. Okay, in this case, what you see is a very extensive usage of family labor. So you try to draw upon that social in a way to further your interests as a slave owner, or in these supply chains, if you're a contractor or if you're a corporation making use of these. Ironically, what is also to be understood here is that, so much of it is going on. We have an increase in modern slavery. These numbers have been going up, and this is despite the fact that we have a very extensive network of anti-slavery NGOs that are present today. There are NGOs operating across the world. In India, for instance, there are several NGOs that are operating that claim to be tackling the problem of modern slavery, and yet the problem is ubiquitous. Okay, in many ways, it goes on unchecked. And what we have to ask ourselves is, what is the role of corporations? What is the role of the supply chains? What is the role of the kind of labor arbitrage that we see through globalization that is, in a way, furthering it? Right? It is interesting that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share two quotes to you, which are nearly 200 years apart, but in a way, they give you a sense of what the issue of corporate responsibility has been. And it goes, corporations, do corporations have a conscience when it has no soul to be damned and no body to be kicked? And by God, it ought to have both. This was a statement made by Lord Chancellor of England in the 18th century. This is the first Baron Thurlow. Okay. Now, the second quote that you see on your screens comes from William Dugar in his book, Corporate Hegemony. Right. And this is around 1989 when he comes up with this. And he points out, in the corporate economies of the contemporary West, the market is a passive institution. The active institution is the corporation, an inherently narrow and short-sighted organization. The corporation has evolved to serve the interests of whoever controls it and at the expense of whomever does not. Okay, this is very sobering. What it tells us is that despite all our efforts, despite all our conversations on the question of ethics, on the question of governance, on the question of accountability and responsibility, you know, there is a very grim reality that we are staring at. And it is important to acknowledge it. It is important to first understand that this is what exists, instead of dismissing it under the garb of corporate social responsibility. Now, what we see is, you know, in fact, I'll argue that in the last 30 to 40 years, depending on which part of the world you are in and how you locate the genesis of neoliberalism, you know, neoliberalism is a system where you know, privatization and markets are supposed to gain ascendance over, you know, the interventions that come from nation states. Okay, and neoliberalism is in a way goes back to some of the conversations that started in the 50s and 60s in what is known as by Mont Pelerin Society. I'm not going to get into those details because they are going to require so much more of time. But what we see around us is neoliberal capitalism, which was again a shift from the model of welfare, you know, state intervention-based capitalism that we saw in the post-war years, at least in the initial decades after the post-war years. But from the 1970s onward, what we have seen is a clear shift on towards the ascendance of private interests, marketization, and you know, and there has been an emphasis on reducing state interventions and the role of the state in you know, creating a balance between private and public interests. In fact, my colleague at Bayes Business School, Bobby Banerjee, calls it a phase of necrocapitalism, where necro, as you will understand, is about death, and how this phase of capitalism is so much more violent and it is so much more extractive. Okay. What we have to possibly also think of is, you know, how is this whole order being maintained? You know, how do we justify what we see? You know, what I've just shared with you in terms of what is going on in Mehendiganj, or how do we justify in terms of the scale of modern slavery that we see around us? You know, because we, as I said earlier, you know, there's so much more of media gaze around us. There's so much more of information that floats around us, and yet so much of what is going on in these, you know, as far as the underclasses are concerned, the disenfranchised are concerned, there's so little attention to that. And what I do is I borrow from a philosopher from University of California, Berkeley, somebody called Judith Butler. What Butler points to is, you know, the idea of derealization. You know, according to her, people who are derealized are not accorded the status of being equal human beings. Okay, if I quote her, and I'll read out what I have on your screens right now. There are no obituaries. If there were to be an obituary, there would have been a life worth noting, a life worth valuing and preserving, a life that qualifies for recognition. So what you do is very systematically, you deny recognition to a vast, segment of our population, of our global population, right?
Just a reminder, Mr. Professor Varma.
Thank you. Thank you. So what you see is derealization becomes a mode of naturalization of corporate misconduct. So on the one hand, corporations can continue to claim, responsibility, but on the other hand, their actual activities can be decoupled from that. And you maintain it through a process of ellipsis and dehumanization. Ellipsis means there's a complete silence. There's a consensus on it that nobody will talk about it. So nobody will talk about modern slavery. So it's just this morning that when I woke up and I was reading The Wire and a report that has come out from one of the Amazon, warehouses, which says how workers are, being forced to work for 10 continuous hours without any fan, without any break, or very minimal breaks. And it is leading to all kinds of crises. There's very little media attention to that. Those activities are going on in a complete state of ellipsis, right? Amazon can claim responsibility just as Coca-Cola can and just as H&M can. And why is that? Because these individuals actually are not human. They're not at least equally human. Okay, so to come back to Judith Butler, she says, it is not just that a death is poorly marked, but that it is unmarkable. Such a death vanishes not into explicit discourse, but in the ellipses by which public discourse proceeds, right? Discourse as in a system of articulation that creates truth regimes. In these discourses, you don't see a mention of what is going on. Or if there is a mention, that is, that hardly is foregrounded. Okay, now this is exactly what we mean by, derealization. Now, and how's this broader structure maintained? As Ong points out, we have a system of graduated sovereignty, which means that in a country, we have 1.4 billion Indians, but not all 1.4 billion have the same rights of citizenship. Of course, on paper they do, but in actual practice, possibly there is a differential. Some are more equal than others, right? And we have to think about how derealization couples with the idea of graduated sovereignty to create a gap between the ethical claims that are made and actual ethical practices of corporations. And you don't have to go very far. You don't need these micro accounts from Coca-Cola or micro accounts of fast fashion supply chains, or from Amazon warehouses. Just look at the inequity levels that we are staring at in our own context. And this in many ways is a global story. For the last 4 or 5 decades, what we have seen an increase in inequity levels. And Palmer ratio is a good indicator, and if you see how, by and large, it was flat until the beginning of the 90s. But after the 90s, you see how it almost exponentially takes off. Okay. And who's really getting left behind? The majority. Okay. I'll just produce a very quick excerpt from a recent Oxfam report. And we must pay attention to it. This battle between billions and billions as we see it, Following the pandemic in 2019, the bottom 50% of the population have continued to see their wealth chipped away. By 2020, their income share was estimated to have fallen to only 13% of the national income and have less than 3% of the total wealth. Its impact has been exceptionally poor diets, increase in debt and debts. The wealthiest 10% own more than 72% of the total wealth. The top 5% own nearly 62% of the total wealth, and the top 1% own nearly 40.6% of the total wealth in India. The country still has the world's highest number of poor at 228.9 million. On the other hand, the total number of billionaires in India increased from 102 in 2020 to 166 billionaires in 2022. You just work out the numbers. Every 9th or 10th day, we are producing a billionaire. Okay, but there is another side to it as well that requires our attention when we talk about business ethics, when we talk about corporate governance or corporate social responsibility. You know, I don't have the time. I wanted to read out an excerpt from this very fine book by Joel Bakan, The New Corporation. Bakan basically goes on to claim how the so-called good corporations today, which claim to be socially responsible, are actually, you know, much more dangerous for democracy. Because what they tend to do is they dismantle the various apparatuses that were put in place by states to create checks and balances. Those checks and balances have been removed, and corporations are having a freer run. And that's a relative argument. I'm not saying they're completely free, but they're having a freer run, which is resulting in some of the issues that we are staring at. Okay, if you're interested, I strongly recommend Bakan's documentary called The Corporation. Okay, and it helps us to understand what is really going on. Just to conclude, and I know I've exceeded my time, you know, when Gandhi was asked about the Western civilization, he said it might be a good idea. You know, my take on corporate social responsibility is something very similar. Might be a good idea. It's still work in progress. It's yet to be really seen, you know. What we see is, as I explained, you know, increasingly under neoliberalism, we see you know, an increase in the role of private enterprises, and this role has come at a cost to the majority, I would argue. You know, what is the role of CSR? CSR is broadly, you know, in a way, serving the interests of corporations to deflect attention. You know, it helps them to legitimize many of their activities. But is it really sustainable? You know, I would say it is unsustainable, because if these are your, you know, if you look at the two examples of H&M and Coca-Cola, if these are your, you know, ecological practices, and if these are your labor practices, then I would say that in the long run, or even in the medium run, this is likely to be unsustainable. You will inevitably see resistance. And I can go on and talk about it. When Coca-Cola faced resistance, they did not know how to handle it, because we don't want to talk about these issues. We don't train our managers to deal with these such instances. Okay, we will inevitably see battles for recognition and redistribution, because the kind of profit imperative that we see is in my view unsustainable. I'll close by reading out, you know, just a passage from a couple of stanzas from Pablo Neruda's very famous poem, United Fruit Company. And I'm sure those of you who are aware of United Fruit Company and what it did in Latin America, you will know the context in which Neruda is writing this. Among the bloodthirsty flies, the fruit company lands its ships, taking off the coffee and the fruit. The treasure of our submerged territories flow as though on plates into the ships. This is the part on the kind of extractive mechanisms, apparatuses that United Fruit Company had put in place in Latin America. And this is the other side of these apparatuses. Meanwhile, Indians are falling into the sugared chasms of the harbors, wrapped for burial in the mist of the dawn. A body rolls a thing that has no name, a fallen cipher, a cluster of the dead fruit thrown down on the dump. This body, this thing, this cipher is your derealized entity that we should be thinking about. And I'm going to close on that note and stop sharing. Thank you very much.
You have to unmute, Shailaji. You have to unmute.
Thank you very much, Professor Varman, for your very, very interesting and enlightening talk, and the very strong views where you have brought out quite clearly the responsibility of corporations in ethical behavior, the gap between claims by large firms and actual reality, and how it affects the disenfranchised and adds to the inequities of society. It's especially relevant to our country, I would say. Thank you so much. We will now hear another eminent speaker from academia, Professor Venkatraman, Head and Dean, Professor, Faculty of Management Studies, one of India's top management schools, whose topic is Managing People and Nurturing Ethical Values. About Professor Venkatraman, a few words. Professor Venkatraman did his master's from Tata Institute of Social Sciences and doctorate from FMS Delhi, and advanced professional training from Harvard Business School and World Bank Institute, Washington, D.C. He has an advisory role and responsibilities with many bilateral and multilateral development partners, such as the World Bank, WHO, DFID, USAID, BMGF, and other international agencies on engaging the private sector for health service delivery in Asia, Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean region. Apart from several research publications, he has written a book on public-private partnership in healthcare in India, Lessons for Developing Countries, by Routledge, London. A recipient of several awards and fellowships, notably the McNamara Fellowship of the World Bank, Ronald Coase Fellowship, University of California, Berkeley, and ICSSR International Senior Research Fellowship of the Erasmus University. Ethics is very dear to him. Professor Venkatraman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Philip, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this webinar and also speak some of the viewpoints from my perspective on values and ethics and how human resource management in organizational level can reinforce some of the ethical and integrity behavior at workplace. I was keenly listening to Professor Berman's point of view. He had laid a wonderful foundation on which I would like to build on. At the core, ethics and governance are not just legal or technical issues. I will go a little further down and go to the more fundamental issue, which is ethics is always based on dilemmas. And these dilemmas are left to the humans to take decisions at the individual and at the organizational level. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, therefore I would like to use a more conversational approach to this entire discussion. My talking points would be broadly focusing on two streaks of thoughts. I use the word carefully, streaks of thought, because there is so much to really dwell into this, but I will limit to only few thoughts about these two streaks of thoughts. The first one is the evolving ethical values in the society that shapes what we are, what we have been, what we will be. Are we unaffected by the realities around us? No, we are very much part of the social milieu and the organizational milieu in which we may be required to take decisions that may not necessarily be reflective of our own values where we come from. The second streak of thought is how managing people through the human resource management practices within the organization can foster more mindful and ethical behavior among employees. I take this view because whether corporate governance, as we recently call it as ESG, is largely based on the decisions of people reflecting their personal values, which I just mentioned to you already. So let me go into the first streak of thought. The fundamental question is, what is the right stage of a person's life or a person in an organizational life that we should be thinking about ethics, integrity, societal responsibility into focus? Certainly not at this stage of our life. I'm sure all of us know that. But the values we imbibe during our formative years is very critical. This is the time when we tend to really groom our own kids, or we have grown up with a certain kind of values that our family had possessed. we are faced with more of nuclear families today than joint families. And therefore, survival rather than hierarchy, individualism rather than collective values tend to prevail in the current stage. When we tell our children to say, somebody knocks on the door and say that I'm not at home, is the first precursor to the joy of lying, joy of saying something that is untrue. But then the child gets to know that it's all right to say a few things that are to your own interest, or do some things that are for your own interest. There is also, I take this Indian context particularly, there is a huge desire among the parents in our society to make their children to be engineers. I too am part of that category of parents. In that process, there is a huge pressure on the children to become performance-centric from school stage, either by hard work or by other means. The core message that we tend to send to our own children is that either 99% or you are a failure. Crack JEE or NEET, otherwise you are finished. These kids grow up with such a performance-centric approach to life that if they don't finish among the top 2% or 3% or etc., they tend to assume that they are no good. So that breeds the reason to believe that shortcuts to life is all right. At the end of the day, you are not going to be counted for what you did, but what you achieved or what you have earned or how you have climbed up the ladder. So that's the value system that is getting reinforced repeatedly in our early life, in our livelihood. Let's now look at an employee who is just about aspiring to walk into an organization. So now we transition from a childhood level to an adulthood level. We have witnessed the Gen Y, Generation Y and Generation Z, we call it as Gen Z, have grown up with these kind of values. Gen Z are particularly grown up with the notion called helicopter parenting. The meaning of helicopter parenting, which is perhaps many of you have heard about, the parents hover around making sure that the children do not suffer, they do not have any failures in life, and they are reinforced constantly saying that you are a great guy, you are a great girl, and you can do wonders in your life, etc. You start giving them every possible commodities or amenities in order to really overcome even minor, discomforts in their life. And therefore, they tend to think that when they grow up, they become more entitled. And they are the ones who are now underskilled and unemployable. Why? I think many of you in the engineering profession would know this, that a very large proportion of engineers are called as underskilled or unemployable. The reason is very simple. I sit in the mechanical engineering class. I don't really have to pay attention to my teacher who is talking about lathe machines or some other thermodynamics principles, because I know that I'm going to go to Infosys. I'm not going to be bothered about mechanical engineering. I would rather do a bit of coding and then try getting myself into Infosys, because Infosys or even a simple call center can get me 35,000 rupees, whereas if I am an engineer, and for God forbid, if I am in southern part of India, I'm not going to get more than 10,000 bucks per month. So these are the Gen Z people are also impatient for success, and their tolerance for failure is also low. That's because, let's take a simple example how this gets reinforced. Many of our kids are in the Facebook and Instagram or X or whatever. They post a message today, or as of let's say about 4:55, And within 456, they would like to go back and see how many people liked their post or how many people, approved and thumbs up and thumbs down, etc. This is the same kind of value system they carry at workplace too. If they do some job, they would like their bosses to really tell them that they have done a great job within a short period of time. If they don't get that kind of a positivity or any kind of reinforcement, they think that they are a failure. And that's one of the reasons why you find a very large number of younger employees going through mental health issues or depression. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that all these Gen Z people are very talented people. They have formed the fulcrum of an organization, especially in engineering-focused industries. If this fulcrum is not strong, then the building is going to be very fragile. Now, these youngsters are highly focused employees, and they carry whatever their societal values to workplace. Their relationship with the company is transactional, is increasingly transactional, and therefore they are not going to be bothered about long-term image of the company as a conscientious employer, or a quality-focused, product, maker. They're all short-term focused. They are all self-centric. I remember one of the automobile company, a very famous automobile company, the new employees would not like to accept a PF deduction, but they have been asking for the money so that they can do whatever they wish to do with the money. So the short-term focus is that they would do the job, and as long as you recognize me, or as long as you pay me well, I'm going to be around. I don't care about the image of the company, its values. I would rather be looking for another job if I am getting paid better. These are the values that sows the seeds towards this notion called ends justify the means and all means are fair. And that's a slogan that I am increasingly seeing among the youngsters, especially with my MBA students too. But I would like to really close the social streak for a moment. Although these are issues that are at a larger malaise in the society, but how do we address them? It's not possible for us in the company as managers to go back to the childhood of an employee or seek employees from a conservative family. One of the major hotel chains in India, very popular hotel chain in India, really look forward to people who come from joint families, who studied in tier 2, tier 3 cities and have been rated very highly by the principal. You would have perhaps heard about one of the Harvard professors who won TEDx talk about this hotel, why they withstood the terror attack. Why didn't they run away? What made these employees of that particular hotel to stay put and look after the guests? To me, that's an exemplary behavior of an employee, despite the threat to their own lives, to stand by the core values of the organization that my organization, my hotel values guests. So what do we do to sustain such kind of values? I think we need to really look at our own human resource management practices and nurture, sustain some of these values that our organizations have been founded upon. This is my second streak of thought. Let me highlight just about 3 or 4 points on this. The first point is organizations are generally built on values from the founder's perspective. Basically, these are the foundations on which corporate cultures are built. As managers, we need to reflect on what these values are and how these values could be reinforced through management systems. There were times, you remember in the early part of the 20th century, there were several companies in India who did a lot of community-related work. They didn't require a CSR law. They did it on their own. They looked after their own employees by building huge townships. They catered to all diverse employees coming from all over the country, and they allowed them to pray in their mosques, temples, and churches. Nobody told them that you need to adopt a village, you need to green a particular place, or you need to be effluent treatment should be within certain kind of a technical limits. They did it on their own. Now, modern organizations, as Professor Varman mentioned about the dehumanization at workplace, some of these values are now creating toxicity at workplace, because especially performance-centric workplaces. Are these values focused too much on performance or profit or stock market performance? Yes, I think that's what we are moving to. Say, for example, if the company's board is only focused on Q1, Q2 results, and sacks senior managers due to poor profits, the entire company and the employees get the message what the company stands for. And the same company cannot be going around with the rhetoric on values and how important the core values of the organization. It doesn't cut ice with the employees inside. We saw that during the COVID pandemic, how many companies let their employees walk miles and thousands of miles without really be bothering about their welfare. Now you come back, when the employees come back, you can't really be claiming that you are a great employer. Now let me focus on the second point, which is about HR systems. We need to think about who do we hire. Are they culturally fit, or do they have the same organizational values that you believe in? Is there a value congruence between what you desire an employee should be focusing on and what kind of employees you are getting in? How do we onboard them? Do we emphasize the need to imbibe the company values? I don't know what the company values where you come from, but as long as there is a congruence and that values are based on societal concerns, individual corporate citizenship behavior, and how do you make profit? If these are fundamentally built into your own values, the value congruence of an employee who comes into the organization will sustain such kind of a corporate culture. Otherwise, you bring in somebody who doesn't believe in it, he's going to be a black sheep around you. During the induction process, what messages are given and how are you reinforcing them during the entire probationary period or during the induction period? How do we confirm, or who do we confirm and who do we weed out after the probationary period? Are we focusing on the ethical integrity part of a person, or are we looking at only his technical or her technical performance alone? The third HR system that can reinforce your ethical or integrity values are related to your performance appraisal system. Do we have any scope in your performance appraisal system for integrity, mindfulness, and ethical behavior as part of evaluation parameter? Yes, most of the government departments have in their APAR system the integrity issue. But then is the integrity given due consideration when they are incentivized, promoted, given certain kind of an increment or bonuses? I'm not sure. Who are the upright people? Do we penalize them for being so? If that is so, then where do we have the foundations of an organizational ethical behavior? Business ethics do not come from jargons or slogans or employee manuals. It has to be seen to be practiced. People in organizations suffer due to pressure to perform, to be cost effective. That creates a toxic culture, and that allows people to compromise on the values. Why do, for example, certain civil engineers in construction or project management industries are constantly under pressure, especially in India, to compromise on quality? Do they seek bribe, or do they have to pay bribe to get the work done? How do we handle such kind of issues? Do such people passively or actively get tolerated in the company? Or do they even get promoted? we have umpteen number of examples of such kind of places where corporates have, looked and winged the behavior that are not conducive for a long-term sustainability of a company. The last part that I would like to mention about is how do we engage? Today we talk about employee engagement. How do we engage our employees? Is it transactional, task-centered, or is it so mechanical in nature? What is the content of your own corporate communication? Are we really focusing more and more on performance, efficiency, cost effectiveness? Or is there a humane message among the corporate communication? Who do you celebrate in your annual days? Badges for the top performers or people who showed concern to a customer? Our birthday celebrations and social get-togethers tend to reinforce positive values in your company, or are they just a ritual? Finally, do companies really give employees space and time to encourage them to take on some of the societal concerns by volunteering to a social cause, as it is done in many IT companies? Where are we at this, on this issue? Now, I stop here because besides all these, there are many other issues such as gender parity, minimum wages, workplace safety, employment of the deprived or marginalized members of the society. How do we, or how are you handling such kind of diverse issues in our own workplace? Remember, at this juncture, I stopped primarily because this issue is more than just the governance and business ethics rhetoric. This is at our level, at our innate level. So thank you so much for patiently listening to me without any kind of slide or anything. So I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Venkatraman. That was very interesting. Thank you for the clarity with which you spoke about nurturing of ethical values right from our formative years. We are products of our upbringing, yes. The focus has changed, however, from generation to generation. A feeling of entitlement prevails and tolerance for failure is less. Though talented and focused, it is not unusual to find employees who are transactional in their attitude to the organization. I think it is important for companies to give importance to ethics and integrity, and how HR practices in an organization should foster ethical behavior among employees. It is very, very important to keep employees engaged, and ethics and integrity at the end of the day should be part of every professional's education and training. What they haven't imbibed when they were young, it may be tough and challenging, but we should still make an effort. So thank you very much, Professor. Now we'll hear the voice from the industry on how things work out on the ground. I invite Mr. Lakshmanan, CHRO from L&T Technology Services, to share their practices. He will speak on building value-centric ethical organization culture. Mr. Lakshmanan is Chief Human Resource Officer of L&T Technology Services. He started his career in the central government, public sector, and moved on to the IT industry more than 2 decades ago. During his career in various international companies, he held global responsibilities in human resource functions. He joined L&T in 2013. He is an HR leader and a global talent management professional with extensive experience in compensation and benefits, talent assessments, talent acquisition, M&As, immigration, global mobility, enterprise process improvements. Mr. Lakshmanan is an active member of NHRDN and has held various office bearer positions. He's a postgraduate specialized in personnel management and industrial relation, and a certified OD practitioner from National Training Laboratory, USA. Over to you, Mr. Lakshmanan.
Sure. Good evening, and thank you very much, Ms. Sayana. And it's great to speak after Dr. Varman and Professor Venkatraman. I think all the essential ingredients that are required to inculcate ethics and corporate governance, how to do that is kind of articulated by both of them in very, very different perspectives, very different lens. I wanted to tell you how we did it in L&T Technology Services, right? And that could be a nice way of leading into the discussion, right? Uh, I don't know if my presentation is visible, Sayana.
Yes, it is.
It's clear. Okay, excellent. So I kind of chose the topic building a value-centric ethical organization culture and the LTTS journey. And what you see on this slide is what we call the value wall, right? If you go to any of our offices around the world, right, you will find a value wall, and you will find, the value wall represented in different ways, but all the important values, and you can see ethics and integrity right in the middle, right there. And I thought I will talk about L&T Technology Services journey in inculcating or disseminating values in the organization, ethics and integrity being an extremely important value. And we call this project Project Avatar. And about 3 years ago, our new CEO then took over the company, and he came and said, how are we going to build a new company culture, right? And so even though it was right in the middle of COVID, early March 2021, we had identified the top 30 leaders from 3 different continents, working through the night from 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock. About 8 or 9 sessions, we sat down together and we defined our culture manifesto, right? What should be the culture manifesto? And the culture manifesto broadly covers the vision, the mission, and the values of the company. Similarly, we came up with, we also said that we want to identify what are the organization behaviors that we will encourage in the organization, and how do we ensure that we build a culture which is collaborative, which is supportive of each other. And most importantly, after we defined our culture manifesto, most importantly, we said, how are we going to make sure that every employee in the company is able to internalize why our vision is crafted the way it is crafted, why our mission is crafted the way it is, and why the values are defined the way they are defined, right? And so that was a very, very important point. Right in the beginning, we decided that whatever we curate for ourselves, we will make sure that every single employee is able to, is part of the journey. Clearly, the journey had 4 parts. We had to, and we actually did the whole thing internally, right? And perhaps very rare that in large organizations like ours, we chose to do it ourselves. We went about using a culture diagnostic instrument to kind of find out, what is the current culture of the company, right? In 2021 or earlier, what is the status quo? What is some of the pain points? What are some of the tipping points? And then we said that, how can we, bring the change in the organization, right? Similarly, we then said we have to design the culture, right? How are we going to design the culture? And when we said we will design the culture, we said that we will play back whatever information we collected from the diagnostic instrument, which was not only from existing employees of the company, but our customers, our future employees, and our investors, our stakeholders. We asked all of them what they think should be L&T Technology Services culture. We played back that, and that was a very, very important input into kind of curating and coming up with our culture manifesto. And together, these 32 leaders curated our culture manifesto for the company. And then we made sure that we cascaded it through the organization. I have a few slides subsequently for you to see how we went about cascading this. And we did in-person workouts, and we communicated to each and every employee around 32 countries. We made sure every single employee went through a 4-hour workout, in-person workout. We started this sometime during early 2022. And then we completed it by April 23, right? Across the globe, we went and we cascaded to them saying, what is our vision? What is our mission? What is our values? And then we had to, what we said we have to bring it all to life, right? Bringing it all to life meant that how do we embed, right, the culture in the organization? And I have some slides which I will talk about, how we brought everything to life, right? Through the entire life cycle, how did we ensure that we, embedded the cultural value system into the organization, and what are the activities we took to make sure that we sustain those through the organization at various employee touch points. And like I said, this is our vision. Together we came up and we said, this is our vision, this is our mission. And you can see a lot of it around the ESG themes that Professor Venkatraman spoke about earlier, being part of our vision and mission. Clearly, our values also were clearly defined, being purposeful, ethics and integrity, were some of the important values that we curated, right? Carrying culture of learning, results with accountability. These were the 5 values. And this was like an exercise we did when these value walls, as you can see in different companies, our employees came and painted these value walls, right? That was very important. We said that, if the employee is part of the creation of that. So in some of our overseas geography, it was like a picnic where employees came with their family members also and painted the value walls in the organization, right? And as you can see, the values being same, but the design is slightly different in different offices of LTTS. The more important thing, like I said, was about how do we make sure that we sustain it. So while we created the values and we said, we defined what the value is, we also introduced what we call Value Award or Avatar Value Award. Estrella is our annual awards, right? Estrella is the name of our annual awards, our annual award events. And we created a new award category called the Avatar Value Award. And these are pictures of some of the people who received those awards, while in 2022, we had about 30 winners. And in 2023, we had about 126 winners. Now, these are people who lived the value, right? Who lived each of those 5 values. And I'm happy to say that, in the ethics and integrity value, it's kind of taken shape where being transparent to a customer requirement, being transparent to what we can do to the customer has been recognized. And I think there are more than 8 or 9 people who've spoken about transparency, right? Ethics and integrity being interpreted as being transparent to the customer, right? And many customers have called out our employees saying, this is the guy who's the face of LTTS, kind of recommendations, right? When we are evaluating the recommendations for the value awards, we see some of those and we're very happy about it. I'll just quickly play out a video, which is a small snippet of how we cascade our values in the company. And this is about ethics and integrity. Shaina, I'm sorry, is my video audible?
We haven't got the audio as yet.
Okay, I think there is a problem.
I recently read
Is it audible now, Sayana?
Yes.
Okay.
in an autobiography of a leader who said, whenever in an ethical doubt, he would look at the photograph of his children at his desk, and that helped him take the right decision. A decision that his kids would be proud of.
Einstein said that the most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and the very existence depends on it. I couldn't agree more with this. Ethics is not something you do to create a certain kind of image or persona for the outside world.
For us, ethics and integrity is not just about doing the right thing. It is about doing the right thing when no one is watching you. It is your moment when you have only to be true to yourself and to the people you love and care about.
It's a set of principles that guide every decision we take, right or wrong, good or bad, reasonable or even excessive. The challenge with ethics is that it doesn't always provide us with answers. Many times we are in a dilemma where we just don't know what the right or wrong action is. This is where it gets very important to consult other people and have an open conversation on difficult topics.
Let me take you back to a time when I was a naughty 5-year-old kid. My dad had brought home a plush new sofa that had a real springy feel to it, bright orange. Now, being a curious child, I wondered what made the sofa so springy. So within 2 days of that sofa coming to home, I took a blade from my father's shaving kit and split it open. Not surprisingly, my father was not happy. He rounded up all the kids at home and asked us who has done it. I probably was too innocent. I raised my hands and said, "It's me." Now, what happened next was astonishing. My father didn't do a thing. He just asked, "Why did you do this?" And I said, "I just wanted to see what's inside." And my dad said, "You should have just asked me. You didn't have to cut it open. Matter closed." Now, this experience has left a lasting impression on me. It showed me that despite my doing something I should never have done, when I had the courage to admit and own up to the mistake, everything was fine.
I want to share one such story from my time at LTTS. We were working diligently on renewing a large deal. We realized that the information we were sharing with them was being passed on to our competitor in the hopes of securing a better offer. That's when we took a step back and asked ourselves, are we being fair to our engineers by putting them on the project that undersells our capabilities? It took us a lot of courage to walk away from such a large deal at the time, but we did it because it was the right thing to do for our people. I slept very well that night with the resonance, with the reassurance that I am part of an organization that has strong ethics and integrity.
Integrity in an official setup is about honoring your commitments, valuing differences, showing fairness and equity with all stakeholders. This is what LTT is all about.
While it might seem simple on the surface, ethics and integrity requires a very high degree of self-awareness and self-restraint.
Ethics and integrity is a lifelong journey of understanding the right thing to do in different situations,
and then building an ironclad will to put them into action.
Throw yourself wholeheartedly into this journey.
It will bring you success, meaning, and fulfillment like no other. This is Rishikesh Rao, Head Business Support.
This is Abhishek Sinha, Chief Operating Officer. Thank you for listening.
So just to add on to the video that you saw, those videos are used to cascade what the value, ethics, and integrity mean. And it's just not about what it means, but what are the behaviors that ethics and integrity mean in our organization, right? So that also is clearly cascaded to our employees. And this slide kind of calls out what ethics and integrity means and what are some of the behaviors that we encourage in our organization. In addition to doing the vision, mission, and values cascade, we also have an ethics line in the company, right? And it is a tool for capturing all the whistleblowing complaints in the organization. and every employee in the company is covered, right from CEO downward. Everybody is covered, and we send out periodic mails. And the couple of images that you see on the right are a typical communication we send every month, telling them what ethics and integrity mean, or what a conflict of interest situation mean. So those communication keeps going periodically, so employees know. They not only know, what is a violation to the code of conduct, but they also know what are those examples. They also know how to raise a complaint. And by the way, this ethics line is actually an outsourced agency, right? The calls and the logs that go into this ethics line actually gets logged somewhere outside. It comes to me as the custodian of the process, as the CHRO, and I have to report it every quarter to the audit committee, to the board members, about how many complaints have come, what action we have taken, and I have an SLA that every complaint that comes in gets closed within 90 days, right? This is just a quick summary in terms of how the usage of ethics line has increased over the last 3 years. We typically had about 5 complaints coming in FY22. In FY23, we divided them into proper whistleblowing complaints and those that are employee-related complaints, which means employees started using the whistleblowing channel to talk about their own personal grievances, right? So as you can see, by FY23, 5 were, personal employee-related grievances. By FY24, we have 11. But nevertheless, we are happy that the number of ethics line complaints are increasing, because we know that the actions that we are taking to make sure that every employee in the organization understands that ethics and integrity is a very, very important value. We are non-tolerant to anybody who is violating our code of conduct, anybody who is violating our ethics and integrity value in the company. So I thought I will, stop here and, perhaps answer questions that you may have. Coming after the academic presentation, I thought mine could be more practical in terms of how we went about doing it. And it's over a 3-year period. And while I tried to quickly share a few slides to kind of give you a context about how you make sure ethics and integrity is embedded into the organization, but I guess, if you have questions, I can answer those as well. Shaina, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lakshmanan. That was very interesting. You really brought out the importance of a systematic approach to ethics and integrity, especially how you get your employees to imbibe those values. The focus, I can see, has been on building an ethical organization with strong values, and the transformative initiatives that you have taken is really commendable. Yes, ethics is doing the right thing when no one is watching. I totally agree with what one of your officers mentioned. Thank you very much, Mr. Lakshmanan. The floor is now open for questions from the audience or participants. Any one of our speakers could take it up. You can, if you want a specific speaker to answer you, you can mention that also.
You have to look into the chat box.
There seems to be quite a few. Let me just...
Questions there?
Yeah. There are also some comments. I will just run through the questions first. There are very appreciative comments. Professor Varman, in your entire career, have you come across corporations who have been responsive to suggestions that you have made, and have they tried to do things differently? That question is for Professor Varman.
I don't go around making suggestions to corporations. My job as an academic is to document what is going on. I let corporations and corporate managers read what I have to write,
Okay.
and I leave it to them to decide how they want to act on it, whether it's Coca-Cola or my recent research in modern slavery. So this is in public. My documentation is in public. My work is in public, and I leave it there. And that's how I define my engagement.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lakshmanan, this question is for you. You were talking about these transformative initiatives that you have taken in the last 3 years. How old is your company, if I may ask? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, am I audible now?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, L&T Technology Services actually formed out of L&T. In 2016, we listed as a separate independent company, and the name L&T Technology Services was created. And our first CEO was there from 2016 to 21. Our new CEO took over in 21. Right? So we are about, say, 8 years old.
That's a lot of progress in such a short time, and as far as ethics and integrity is concerned. Thank you. Mr. Venkatraman, when you, FMS does a lot of placement for its students. Do you, as a management, do you consider the kind of organization that is coming for recruitment from the point of ethics, whether it's an ethical organization, from that perspective?
Well, I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first part is that FMS as such is that it is the oldest business school in India. Now, of course, university affiliated one. There is a saying that empty vessels make a lot of noise. We are very silent in what we do, and therefore, in terms of our inclusivity of the students from diverse background, we admit about 14 different categories of students. We are one of the lowest in terms of our fee structure, 2 lakhs for 2 years, the entire MBA program. So we are practicing people. So if I were to take my own faculty members, 99% of classes are taken. We have a class from 9 o'clock till 9 o'clock in the evening. And so, but we don't crow or we don't, shout from the rooftop. So we do practice what we believe in, number one. Number two, yes, a large number of companies do come and they also look for the cultural congruence vis-a-vis with the values. But I wish they were a little more conscientious about the students' own personality profile that can really match with their requirement at workplace. Sometimes the recruiters are also themselves quite young. They may be Gen Y. So they see the congruence between them and their the candidates. They don't see the congruence between the organizational values only when a senior employee or a senior manager flies down to really look at the candidates. That's when really you see the difference. So it is possible to improve the value orientation of students to be examined for placement. At this juncture, very few companies do it, but many of them just take them because they are highly competitive for talent. And therefore, they try to pick up students who are somewhat better polished in their appearance or in their ability to communicate. So I would say that still a lot of things to do for the companies, especially the finance, consulting, and IT consulting companies.
Thank you, Professor Venkatraman. There's one question for Mr. Lakshmanan. How does L&T TS deal with bribery and corruption when dealing with client? Is there a stated transparent policy?
Yes, zero tolerance. And I have not come across a situation where any of our employee has given bribe to a customer to get a contract till now, right? Or at least it's not reported. I am the CHRO for the last 5 years, and no such situation has occurred so far. However, on matters of ethics and integrity, there have been a few, events which are, against the company's ethics and against the company's code of conduct. And when such events, investigations, transgressions happen, action is very swift, and normally it is termination of service.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lakshman. Professor Varman, you said that contract slavery, you mentioned contract slavery, but the contracts are always, both parties are in agreement and the terms and conditions are agreed by the parties. There are many businesses run on contracts. What are the ways out? I'm not sure I fully understood the question. I hope you have.
I'll try to answer this. Thank you for sharing that question.
Yeah.
Now, as I explained that, modern slavery is fundamentally different from its transatlantic form. And one of the points of departure that you see here is that, nobody is putting a gun on your head. Nobody is really forcing you to get onto a ship and to move from one part of the world to another part. What you see is a system of what I call a market slavery. Where you create such conditions where an individual will surrender. They will offer their labor power or their labor to a potential employer under extremely, coercive, exploitative conditions. And that's the key to it. So yes, somebody could be signing on dotted line, somebody could be entering into a contract, somebody could be taking a loan and then offering her or his labor. But this is not really voluntary as we understand, the idea of contracts where, there are two parties which voluntarily offer to enter into an agreement. This is far from it. When you have such a, such a power differential, it can never be equal. The two parties are not fundamentally equal. And that's where you have to juxtapose this with my discussion on, the Oxfam report and Palmer ratio. And unless you see the two pieces together, you'll not understand what exactly is going on. And it would be a mistake to then equate it to the kind of contracts two equal corporate entities enter into, or two equal businesses enter into. So that's how I would respond to this question, and I hope I've answered it.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Varman. Are there any more questions from the audience? No? Yeah. I think we will close with that. We are running slightly late, so I would like to make a few remarks before conclusion. The objective of this webinar was to create an awareness amongst the professional fraternity about the importance of ethics and integrity. We have pretty much covered several aspects, including corporate social responsibility, the importance of sustainable economic development for all stakeholders, including employees and the local community, and how corporations are at the risk of evolving into self-servers for the interests of whoever controls it. This needs to be overcome with social and ethically responsible behavior. Our speakers have also lucidly brought out the need of a process to educate and train professionals through HR practices such that they imbibe the values of ethics and integrity in their professional formative years to take over as managers and ultimately top management in an organization. Ultimately, the top leadership sets the tone for ethical behavior, and the mid-level leadership is key to dissemination. We saw how responsible corporates or business entities internalize an ethical culture in multifaceted stages of diagnosing, designing, cascading, and disseminating, and bringing to life an ethical culture. In the long run, socially responsible conduct by individuals or corporates and ethical practices pay off. It enhances the credibility of the profession and the organization and engenders trust and will prove to be indispensable for the success and longevity of the organization. Thank you very much, our esteemed speakers, Professor Varman, Professor Venkatraman, Mr. Lakshmanan, for that very interesting and deeply absorbing session, for having spared your valuable time in the midst of very, very busy schedules. Mr. Srivastav, Chair of the Ethics Subcommittee, Mr. Narayana, who very kindly stood in for our President who's traveling, Mr. Rajiv Maini, Director of CEI, and his Secretariat team who put in all the effort and provided the support to put together this webinar. And most importantly, our participants. No webinar can be successful without your active participation. Thank you, everyone, and good day.